Thus, prayer or Brahma became the highest of all deities. Brahma is invoked with awe. O God, I see in your body all the gods and the multitude of living beings. I am powerless to see you in your entirety, for you shine like the fire and the sun in your immensity. Thou, the invisible, art the supreme intelligence, the sovereign treasure of the universe, without beginning, middle, or end, equipped with infinite might. Thine arms are limitless, thine eyes are as bright as the moon and sun, and thy mouth shines like the sacred fire. Thou alone fills all the space between heaven and earth, permeating the entire universe. Brahma, the soul of the universe, is not only the supreme God but also the very substance of the world. All beings are born from Brahma, naturally issuing from him like a tree from a seed or a spider's web. He did not create the world, he is the world. Every being has a soul, a part of Brahma's soul, including gods, men, animals, plants, and stones. These souls undergo transmigration, or the passing from one body to another. When a person dies, their soul is tested. If it is good, it goes to the heaven of Indra to enjoy happiness. If it is bad, it falls into one of 28 hells, where it is tormented by demons and forced to swallow burning cakes. Souls do not remain in heaven or hell forever, but instead begin a new life in another body. Good souls rise and enter the body of a saint or god, while evil souls descend and inhabit impure animals or plants. This journey continues until the soul reaches the highest sphere, which takes 24 million years to achieve. Once perfect, the soul returns to the level of Brahma and is absorbed into it. The religion of the Caucasians was simple and happy, but this religion is complicated and barren. It takes shape among those who are not engaged in practical life and are weakened by life's heat and vexations. Rites. The practice of religion is much more complex. Hymns and sacrifices are still offered to the gods, but the Brahmins have gradually invented thousands of minute customs so that one's life is completely engaged with them. For all the ceremonies of the religious life there are prayers, offerings, vows, libations, and ablutions. Some of the religious requirements attach themselves to dress, ornaments, etiquette, drinking, eating, mode of walking, lying down, sleeping, dressing, undressing, and bathing. It is ordered that a Brahman shall not step over a rope to which a calf is attached, that he shall not run when it rains, that he shall not drink water in the hollow of his hand, and that he shall not scratch his head with both his hands. The man who breaks clods of earth, who cuts grass with his nails, or who bites his nails is, like the outcast, speedily hurried to his doom. An animal must not be killed, for a human soul may perhaps be dwelling in the body. One must not eat it on penalty of being devoured in another life by the animals which one has eaten. All these rites have a magical virtue. He who observes them all is a saint, and he who neglects any of them is impious and destined to pass into the body of an animal. Purity. The principal duty is keeping oneself pure, for every stain is a sin and opens one to the attack of evil spirits. But the Brahmins are very scrupulous concerning purity. Men outside of the castes, many animals, the soil, and even the utensils which one uses are so many impure things. Whoever touches these is polluted and must at once purify himself. Life is consumed in purification. Penances. For every defect in the rites, penance is necessary, often a terrible one. He who involuntarily kills a cow must clothe himself in its skin, and for 3 months, day and night, follow and tend a herd of cows. Whoever has drunk of arrack must swallow a boiling liquid which burns the internal organs until death results. The monks. To escape the perils of the world and maintain purity, it is best to depart from it. Often a Brahmin who has reached certain age retreats to the desert, fasting, keeping watch, refraining from speech, exposing himself naked to the rain, standing erect amidst 4 fires under the scorching sun. After some years the hermit becomes a penitent. Then his only means of subsistence is through alms-giving. For whole days he raises an arm in the air without uttering a word, holding his breath. Or perhaps he cuts himself with razor blades. He may even keep his thumbs closed until the nails pierce his hands. Through these mortifications he destroys passion, frees himself from this life, and through contemplation ascends to Brahma. Yet this path to salvation is only open to the Brahmin. Even he has the right to retreat to the desert only in old age, after having studied the Vedas throughout his life, practiced all the rites, and established a family. Buddhism, Buddha. Millions of men who were not Brahmins suffered through this life of minutiae and agony. A man then appeared who brought a doctrine of deliverance. He was not a Brahmin, but of the Kshatriya caste, the son of a king from the north. Until the age of 29, he lived in his father's palace. One day he met an old man with a bald head, wrinkled features, and trembling limbs. A second time, he met an incurable invalid, covered in ulcers, without a home. Again, he encountered a decaying corpse devoured by worms. And so, he thought, youth, health, and life are nothing, for they offer no resistance to old age, sickness, and death. He had compassion for men and sought a remedy. Then he met a religious mendicant with a grave and dignified air. Following his example, he decided to renounce the world. These 4 meetings had determined his calling. Buddha, seeking enlightenment, fled to the desert, where he lived for 7 years in penitence, enduring hunger, thirst, and rain. These mortifications brought him no peace. He ate, grew strong, and discovered the truth. He then returned to the world to preach it, gaining crowds of disciples who called him Buddha, the scholar. After 45 years of preaching, Buddhism was established. According to Buddha, to live is to be unhappy. Every man suffers because he desires the goods of this world, such as youth, health, and life, but cannot keep them. All life is suffering, born of desire. To suppress suffering, one must root out desire and cease from wishing to live. The wise man is he who casts aside everything that attaches to this life and makes it unhappy. One must cease successively from feeling, wishing, and thinking. Then, freed from passion, volition, and even reflection, he no longer suffers and can come to the supreme good after his death, which consists of being delivered from all life and suffering. The aim of the wise man is the annihilation of personality, which the Buddhists call nirvana. Buddha also preached the importance of charity, which was a new sentiment compared to the Brahmins, who considered life a place of suffering and annihilation as felicity. The religion of the Brahmins was steeped in egoism, but Buddha was a man of compassion who preached love to his disciples and to all those who would listen. He knew that what despairing souls needed most was a word of sympathy, and he taught his followers to love even those who would do them harm. When Purna, one of his disciples, went out to preach to the barbarians, Buddha tested him by asking what he would do if they spoke angry words to him, or even struck him with a staff or sword. Purna replied that he would still think of them as good men, even if they did him harm, because he believed that all people were capable of goodness. Buddha's teachings were based on the principle of fraternity, which held that all men were equal in the eyes of God, regardless of their caste or social status. Unlike the Brahmins, who believed that they were purer than others, Buddha welcomed all men into his fold, including pariahs, beggars, cripples, and even murderers and thieves. He preached to them in simple language, using parables to illustrate his points, and he was not afraid to touch them or to be touched by them. Finally, Buddha was a man of great tolerance, who did not demand that his followers observe minute rites or exertions in order to achieve salvation. Instead, he taught them to be charitable, chaste, and beneficent, and to spread their goodness and mercy to all those around them. He believed that the perfect man was one who diffused himself in benefits over creatures, and who comforted the afflicted. His doctrine was one of mercy, and he knew that it was not always easy to follow, especially for those who were fortunate in the world. Thus, 5 centuries before Christ, a new religion emerged, unlike any other. It lacked a god and elaborate rituals, instead emphasizing the importance of loving one's neighbor and striving for personal improvement. The ultimate reward was not eternal life, but rather annihilation. However, this religion also preached selflessness, equality, charity, and tolerance, concepts that had never been emphasized before. The Brahmins fiercely opposed it and eventually eradicated it from India, but Buddhist missionaries spread it to Ceylon, Indochina, Tibet, China, and Japan. Today, it boasts millions of adherents. Over the past 2 millennia, Buddhism has evolved significantly. Buddha established communities of monks who renounced their families, took vows of poverty and chastity, and begged for their sustenance while wearing tattered clothing. These monks grew in number and established convents throughout Eastern Asia. They convened councils to establish doctrine and rules, and as they gained power, they began to view themselves as superior to other believers, much like the Brahmins. They preached that lay people should support the religious and feel honored when the holy men accepted their offerings. In Tibet, the religious, including men and women, comprise a significant portion of the population, and their leader, the Grand Lama, is revered as a divine incarnation. As the Buddhist religion became more dominant, they also developed a complex theology filled with fantastical figures. They believe in an infinite number of worlds, each teeming with creatures like gods, humans, beasts, and demons who are born and die. Universes are destroyed and replaced, and the duration of each is called a kalpa. To get a sense of a kalpa's length, imagine a rock 12 miles high, wide and long, and imagine that it is touched with a piece of fine linen once a century. Before a quarter of a kalpa has passed, that rock would be worn down to the size of a mango kernel. Buddhism transformed into a deity. The Buddhists of today no longer find it sufficient to honor their founder as a perfect man. Instead, they have elevated him to the status of a god, erecting statues in his likeness and offering him worship. They also revere his disciples, constructing pyramids and shrines to house their bones, teeth, and cloaks. Devotees from all corners of the world come to pay homage to the impression of Buddha's foot. Mechanical prayer. In modern times, Buddhists view prayer as a magical formula that acts on its own. They spend their days reciting prayers while they walk or eat, often in a language they do not comprehend. They have even invented prayer machines, which are revolving cylinders with papers attached to them on which the prayer is written. Each turn of the cylinder counts as the utterance of the prayer as many times as it is written on the paper. Amelioration of manners. Despite these changes, Buddhism remains a religion of peace and charity. Wherever it is practiced, kings refrain from war and even hunting. They establish hospitals, caravansaries, and asylums for animals. Strangers, including Christian missionaries, are welcomed with hospitality. Women are allowed to go out and walk without veiling themselves, and fighting and quarreling are prohibited. In Bangkok, a city of over 1 million people, only one murder is known to occur each year. Chapter 6. The Persians and Zoroaster. Iran rises between the Tigris and the Indus, the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf. It is a land 5 times the size of France, but only partially fertile. The terrain consists of scorching deserts and icy plateaus, with deep and wooded valleys. Mountains surround Iran, trapping the rivers, which either disappear into the sands or salt lakes. The climate is harsh, with extreme temperatures ranging from 104 degrees above zero to 40 degrees below zero, and violent winds that cut like a sword. However, the valleys along the rivers are fertile, and the land is abundant with fruits and pastures. Iran was originally inhabited by Caucasian tribes, who were a race of shepherds. The Iranians were well-armed and warlike, fighting on horseback and drawing the bow. To protect themselves from the biting wind, they wore garments of skin sewn onto their bodies. The Iranians initially worshipped the forces of nature, particularly the sun or Mithra. However, between the 10th and 7th centuries before our era, their religion was reformed by a sage named Zarathustra, or Zoroaster. Little is known about him except for his name. Zoroaster's doctrine was not written down by his own hand, but it was later recorded in the Zend-Avesta, or Law and Reform, the sacred books of the Persians. The Zend-Avesta was written in an ancient language, the Zend, that was no longer understood by the faithful. The text was divided into 21 books, inscribed on 12,000 cowskins and bound by golden cords. The Mohammedans destroyed the Zend-Avesta when they invaded Persia, but some Persian families who were faithful to Zoroaster's teachings fled to India. Their descendants, known as Parsis, have maintained the old religion in India. Today, an entire book of the Zend-Avesta and fragments of 2 others have been found among the Parsis. The sacred text of the Zoroastrian religion, the Zend-Avesta, tells the tale of 2 deities, Ahura Mazda, also known as Ormuzd, and Angra Mainyu, also known as Ahriman. Ormuzd, the omniscient sovereign, is the creator of the world, and is celebrated in prayer as luminous, glorious, most intelligent and beautiful, eminent in purity, who possessest the good knowledge, source of joy, who hast treated us, hast fashioned us, and hast nourished us. As a perfect being, Ormuzd can only create good, while everything bad in the world is the creation of Ahriman, the spirit of anguish. The armies of Ormuzd and Ahriman are made up of angels and demons, respectively. Ormuzd's soldiers, known as Yazatas, are good angels, while Ahriman's troops are evil demons, called Devs. The angels reside in the east, basking in the light of the rising sun, while the demons dwell in the west, shrouded in darkness. The 2 armies are in constant conflict, with the world serving as their battleground. Ormuzd and his angels seek to benefit humanity, making them good and happy, while Ahriman and his demons work to destroy them, making them miserable and wicked. All good things on earth are the work of Ormuzd, and serve a positive purpose. The sun and fire bring light and warmth. The stars guide us. Fermented drinks quench our thirst. Cultivated fields feed us. Trees provide shade. And domestic animals, especially dogs, are loyal companions. Birds, particularly the rooster, are also revered for living in the air and announcing the arrival of a new day. Conversely, everything harmful is the work of Ahriman and serves a negative purpose. The night is dark and dangerous. Drought and cold are harsh. The desert is unforgiving. Poisonous plants and thorns harm us. And beasts of prey, serpents and parasites like mosquitoes, fleas and bugs cause us pain. Animals that live in dark holes, such as lizards, scorpions, toads, rats and ants, are also considered to be the work of Ahriman. In the moral world, life, purity, truth and work are considered good and come from Ormuzd, while death, filth, falsehood and idleness are considered bad and come from Ahriman. Worship stems from the belief in a good god and the need to fight for him. The Persians, unlike the Greeks, do not erect statues, temples or altars to their gods. They believe that the gods do not have human forms, and that Ormuzd, the god of light, only manifests himself under the form of fire or the sun. Therefore the Persians perform their worship in the open air on the mountains, before a lighted fire. They sing hymns to Ormuzd's praise and sacrifice animals in his honor. Morality, for the Persians, involves fighting for Ormuzd by aiding his efforts and overcoming Ahriman's. They battle against darkness by supplying the fire with dry wood and perfumes, and against the desert by tilling the soil and building houses. They also fight against impurity by keeping themselves clean and banishing everything that is dead, especially nails and hair, as demons and unclean animals assemble where they are. They fight against falsehood by always being truthful, as lying is considered shameful. They also fight against death by marrying and having many children, as the Zend Avesta states that houses void of posterity are terrible. When a person dies, their body belongs to the evil spirit, and it must be removed from the house. However, burning, burying or drowning the body would bring permanent pollution. Instead, the Persians expose the body with the face toward the sun in an elevated place and leave it uncovered, securely fixed with stones. The bearers then withdraw to escape the demons that assemble in places of sepulture. Dogs and birds, pure animals, come to purify the body by devouring it. The destiny of the soul is a matter of great importance. When a person passes away, their soul separates from their body. On the third night after death, the soul crosses the bridge of assembling, also known as Shinvat. This bridge leads to paradise, which is located above the Gulf of Inferno. There, Ormuzd questions the soul about its past life. If the soul has lived a virtuous life, the pure spirits and spirits of dogs support it and help it cross the bridge. They grant the soul entrance into the abode of the blessed. The demons flee from the virtuous spirits, as they cannot bear their odor. However, if the soul has lived a wicked life, it comes to the dreadful bridge with no one to support it. Demons drag the soul to hell, where it is seized by the evil spirit and chained in the abyss of darkness. Mazdaism is a religion that originated in a country of violent contrasts. The Iranian people witnessed luxuriant valleys next to barren steppes, cool oases alongside burning deserts, and cultivated fields near stretches of sand. They saw the forces of nature engaged in eternal warfare, and they assumed that this combat was the law of the universe. Thus, a religion of great purity was developed, which urged people to work hard and practice virtue. However, this religion also introduced the belief in the devil and demons, which would later spread to the West and torment all the peoples of Europe. The Persian Empire was made up of many tribes living in Iran. Two of these tribes became notable in history, the Medes and the Persians. The Medes lived in the west, closer to the Assyrians. They destroyed Nineveh and its empire in 625 BC. However, they soon adopted the flowing robes, indolent life, and superstitious religion of the degenerate Assyrians. Eventually, they were confused with them. On the other hand, the Persians lived in the east and preserved their manners, religion, and vigor. According to Herodotus, the Persians taught their children only 3 things for 20 years: to mount a horse, to draw the bow, and to tell the truth. In the year 550 BC, a man named Cyrus rose to power and became the leader of the Medes. He then went on to conquer and unite all the peoples of Iran. After that, he set his sights on Lydia, Babylon, and all of Asia Minor. According to the historian Herodotus, there was a legend that became attached to Cyrus. In his own words, Cyrus declared, "I am Cyrus, king of the legions, great king, mighty king, king of Babylon, king of Sumir and Akkad, king of the four regions, son of Cambyses, the great king of Susiana, grandson of Cyrus, king of Susiana. Cyrus's eldest son, Cambyses, killed his brother Smerdis and then conquered Egypt. The story of what happened next is told in an inscription that can still be seen today on the frontier of Persia. The inscription is carved into an enormous rock that stands about 1,500 feet high and is known as the Rock of Behistun. On the rock, there is a bas-relief of a crowned king with his left hand on a bow. He tramples on one captive while 9 other prisoners are presented before him in chains. The inscription, which is written in 3 languages, tells the story of the king's life. The inscription reads, "Darius the king declares, 'This is what I did before I became king. Cambyses, son of Cyrus of our race, reigned here before me. This Cambyses had a brother Smerdis, of the same father and the same mother. One day Cambyses killed Smerdis. When Cambyses killed Smerdis, the people were ignorant that Smerdis was dead. After this, Cambyses made an expedition to Egypt. While he was there, the people became rebellious. Falsehood was then rife in the country, in Persia, in Media, and the other provinces. There was at that time a magus named Gaumata. He deceived the people by saying that he was Smerdis, the son of Cyrus. Then the whole people rose in revolt, forsook Cambyses and went over to the pretender. After this, Cambyses died from a wound inflicted by himself. After Gaumata had drawn away Persia, Media, and the other countries from Cambyses, he followed out his purpose. He became king. The people feared him on account of his cruelty. He would have killed the people so that no one might learn that he was not Smerdis, the son of Cyrus. Darius the king declares there was not a man in all Persia or in Media who dared to snatch the crown from this Gaumata, the magus. Then I presented myself, I prayed Ormuzd. Ormuzd accorded me his protection. Accompanied by faithful men, I killed this Gaumata and his principal accomplices. By the will of Ormuzd, I became king. The empire which had been stolen from our race I restored to it. The altars that Gaumata the magus had thrown down I rebuilt to the deliverance of the people. I received the chants and the sacred ceremonies. After overthrowing the usurper, Darius had to make war on many of the revolting princes. He declared, "I have won 19 battles and overcome 9 kings." The Persian Empire rose to greatness under the leadership of Darius, who quelled rebellions and restored order to the land. He also expanded the empire's borders by conquering Thrace and a province of India. This vast empire brought together peoples from all over the Orient, including Medes, Persians, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Jews, Phoenicians, Syrians, Lydians, Egyptians, and Indians. It spanned from the Danube in the west to the Indus in the east, and from the Caspian Sea in the north to the Nile's cataracts in the south. It was the largest empire of its time, and it fell to a tribe of mountaineers who inherited the legacy of all the Asian empires. Oriental kings were not known for their involvement in their subjects' lives, and Darius was no exception. He allowed each people in his empire to govern itself according to its own customs, language, religion, laws, and even its ancient princes. However, he was careful to regulate the taxes his subjects paid. He divided the empire into 20 districts called satrapies, each with people who spoke different languages and had different customs and beliefs. Still, each satrapy was to pay a fixed annual tribute, partly in gold and silver, and partly in natural products like wheat, horses, and ivory. The satrap, or governor, collected the tribute and sent it to the king. The king's total revenue amounted to $16 million, paid by weight, in addition to the tributes in kind. This sum, equivalent to $120 million in modern times, was used to support the satraps, the army, domestic servants, and an extravagant court. Despite this, the king still had enormous ingots of metal left over every year, which accumulated in his treasuries. Like all Orientals, the king of Persia took pride in possessing an immense treasure. The ruler of Persia was a man of immense power and wealth, unmatched by any king before him. The Greeks referred to him as the Great King, a title befitting his absolute control over all his subjects, including the Persians and those who paid tribute to him. The writings of Herodotus reveal how Cambyses treated the great lords at his court. One day he asked Prexaspes, whose son was his cupbearer, "What do the Persians think of me?" Prexaspes replied, "Master, they shower you with praises, but they believe that you have a little too strong a desire for wine." In anger, Cambyses commanded Prexaspes to find out if the Persians spoke the truth by shooting his son in the heart. The prince fell, and Cambyses had the body opened to see where the arrow had landed. It was found in the middle of the heart. The prince's joyous response to his father was, "You see that it is the Persians who are out of their senses. Tell me if you have seen anybody strike the mark with so great accuracy." Prexaspes replied, "Master, I do not believe that even a god could shoot so surely." The Persians provided a significant service to the peoples of Asia. While conquerors demanded tribute and despots demanded allegiance, the Persians subjected all these peoples to one master, preventing them from fighting among themselves. Under Persian domination, there was no ceaseless burning of cities, the devastation of fields, massacre, or wholesale enslavement of inhabitants. It was a period of peace. The kings of the Medes and Persians followed the example of the lords of Assyria by building palaces for themselves. The most famous of these palaces were those at Susa and Persepolis. The ruins of Susa have been excavated by a French engineer who discovered sculptures, capitals, and friezes in enameled bricks that demonstrate an advanced stage of art. The palace of Persepolis left ruins of considerable mass. The rock of the hill had been fashioned into an enormous platform on which the palace was built. The approach to it was by a gently rising staircase so broad that 10 horsemen could ascend, riding side by side. Persian architects, in their quest for beauty, looked to the Assyrians for inspiration. At Persepolis and Susa, much like in Assyria, we see flat-roofed buildings with terraces, gates guarded by stone-carved monsters, and intricate bas-reliefs and enameled bricks depicting hunting scenes and ceremonies. However, the Persians improved upon their models in 3 ways. Firstly, they opted for marble instead of brick. Secondly, they installed painted wooden floors in the halls. And thirdly, they erected 8 columns in the form of tree trunks, the slenderest known to man, towering 12 times as high as they were thick. These innovations made Persian architecture more elegant and lighter than that of Assyria. Though the Persians had not made much progress in the arts, they were renowned for their honesty, sanity, and bravery. For 2 centuries, they reigned over Asia with a sovereignty that was the least cruel and unjust of its time. Chapter 7. Phoenicia and the Phoenicians. Phoenicia is a narrow strip of land, stretching 150 miles long and 24 to 30 miles wide. It is enclosed between the Sea of Syria and the high range of Lebanon. The terrain is a series of narrow valleys and ravines, surrounded by steep hills that slope towards the sea. During the early spring, small torrents formed by snow or rainstorms flow through the valleys, but in the summer, no water remains except in wells and cisterns. The mountains in this region were always covered with trees, and at the summit were the famous cedars of Lebanon. On the ridges, pines and cypresses grew, while lower down, palms grew even to the seashore. In the valleys, the olive, vine, fig, and pomegranate flourished. The Phoenician cities were located at intervals along the rocky coast, where promontories or islands formed natural harbors. Tyre and Arad were each built on a small island, and the people housed themselves in dwellings that were 6 to 8 stories high. Fresh water was brought over by ships. The other cities, Gebel, Beirut, and Sidon, arose on the mainland. The soil was not enough to support the large population, so the Phoenicians were primarily seamen and traders. Unfortunately, not a single book of the Phoenicians has survived, not even a sacred book. The sites of their cities have been excavated, but the ruins have not been well preserved. The Syrians violated the tombs to remove the jewels of the dead, demolished buildings to obtain stone for construction, and destroyed sculptures due to Muslim hatred of chiseled figures. As a result, very little is found beyond broken marble, cisterns, wine presses cut in the rock, and some sarcophagi hewn in the rock. This debris provides little information, and we know very little more about the Phoenicians than what Greek writers and Jewish prophets have taught us. The Phoenicians never built an empire. Each city had its own independent territory, assemblies, king, and government. For general state business, each city sent delegates to Tyre, which became the principal city of Phoenicia from the 13th century BC. The Phoenicians were not a military people, and therefore submitted themselves to all the conquerors, including the Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians. They fulfilled all their obligations to them by paying tribute. Tyre was a city of great renown, particularly in the 13th century. Its island was too small to contain its growing population, so a new city was constructed on the opposite coast. Tyrian merchants established colonies throughout the Mediterranean, receiving silver from the mines of Spain and goods from all corners of the ancient world. The prophet Isaiah referred to these traders as princes, while Ezekiel described the caravans that came to them from all directions. King Hiram of Tyre was the one whom Solomon requested workmen from to build his palace and temple in Jerusalem. Carthage, a colony of Tyre, surpassed even its mother city in power. In the 9th century, some Tyrians who were exiled by a revolution founded the city of Carthage on the African shore near Tunis. A woman named Elisar, whom we call Dido the Fugitive, led them. According to legend, the locals were only willing to sell her enough land to cover a bull's hide, but she cut the hide into narrow strips that enclosed a vast territory, where she constructed a citadel. Situated at the center of the Mediterranean with 2 harbors, Carthage thrived, established colonies, made conquests, and eventually reigned over all the coasts of Africa, Spain, and Sardinia. It had commerce agencies and subjects who paid tribute everywhere. To protect its colonies from natives and keep its subjects in check, a strong army was necessary. However, a Carthaginian's life was too valuable to risk without necessity. Carthage preferred to pay mercenary soldiers, recruiting them from the barbarians of its empire and adventurers from all over. Its army was a strange mixture in which all languages were spoken, all religions were practiced, and every soldier wore different arms and costumes. There were Numidians clothed in lion skins that served as their couch, mounted bareback on small, fleet horses, and drawing their bows with the horse at full gallop. There were also Libyans with black skins, armed with pikes, Iberians from Spain in white garments adorned with red, armed with a long pointed sword, Gauls naked to the girdle, bearing enormous shields and a rounded sword that they held in both hands, and natives of the Balearic Islands, trained from infancy to sling stones or balls of lead. The generals were Carthaginians, but the government distrusted them, watched them closely, and had them crucified when they were defeated. The Carthaginians were a people ruled by a senate comprised of the wealthiest merchants in the city, despite having 2 kings. Their focus was on commerce, making every state issue a matter of trade. Although they were despised by other nations for their cruelty, greed, and treachery, their powerful fleet, wealth, and efficient government allowed them to maintain their grip on the western Mediterranean for 300 years, from the 6th to the 3rd century BC, amidst a sea of barbarous and divided peoples. The Phoenicians and Carthaginians had a religion similar to that of the Chaldeans. Their male god, Baal, was a sun god, as the sun and moon were considered the great forces of creation and destruction. Each city in Phoenicia had its divine pair, with Baal Sidon, the sun, and Ashtoreth, the moon, in Sidon, Baal Tammuz and Baleth in Gebel, and Baal Hammon and Tanith in Carthage. However, Baal's name changed depending on whether he was seen as a creator or destroyer. In Carthage, Baal was worshipped as Moloch, the destroyer. The gods were represented by idols, with their own temples, altars, and priests. As creators, they were honored with orgies and tumultuous feasts, while, as destroyers, they were appeased with human sacrifices. Ashtoreth, the great goddess of Sidon, was represented by the crescent moon and the dove, and had her cult in the sacred woods. Baal Moloch was depicted as a bronze colossus with extended and lowered arms. To appease him, children were placed in his hands and fell into a pit of fire. During the siege of Carthage by Agathocles, the city's leaders sacrificed as many as 200 of their children to Moloch. This religion, with its sensuality and bloodshed, horrified other nations, yet they imitated it. The Jews sacrificed to Baal on the mountains, while the Greeks worshipped Astarte of Sidon as Aphrodite and Baal Melkart of Tyre as Heracles. Phoenician commerce. In the ancient world, the Phoenicians were known as the masters of commerce. Despite their small territory, they made their living through trade, something that no other people in the east or west dared to do. The Egyptians, Chaldeans, Assyrians, Spaniards, Gauls, and Italians had no navy, but the Phoenicians did. They were the commission merchants of their time, traveling to every corner of the world to buy and sell goods. They used caravans to transport goods over land and ships to sail the seas. Their caravans went in 3 directions. The first was towards Arabia, where they brought back gold, agate, onyx, incense, myrrh, pearls, spices, ivory, ebony, ostrich plumes, and apes from India. The second was towards Assyria, where they found cotton and linen cloths, asphalt, precious stones, perfumes, and silk from China. The third was towards the Black Sea, where they received horses, slaves, and copper vases made by the mountaineers of the Caucasus. Their ships were made from the cedars of Lebanon and were propelled by both oars and sails. They were skilled sailors who knew how to navigate by the polar star and were not afraid to venture into the open ocean. They sailed to the shores of England and perhaps even Norway. In fact, Phoenicians in the service of a king of Egypt circumnavigated Africa in the 7th century BC and returned after 3 years by way of the Red Sea. Another expedition from Carthage sailed along the coast of Africa to the Gulf of Guinea, and the commander Hanno wrote an account of the voyage that still exists today. Commodities were the lifeblood of the Phoenicians, who sold their wares to civilized peoples and scoured barbarous lands in search of goods not found in the Orient. Along the coast of Greece, they harvested shellfish to extract a red dye known as purple, which was used to color cloth worn by kings and great lords throughout ancient times. From Spain and Sardinia, the Phoenicians procured silver from the mines. Tin, necessary for making bronze, was not found in the Orient, so they sought it on the coasts of England, in the Isles of Tin or the Cassiterides. Slaves were also a valuable commodity, and the Phoenicians procured them through various means, including purchasing them and raiding coasts to capture women and children. The Phoenicians were secretive about their trade routes, not wanting to invite competition from other mariners. They concealed the road they traveled on their return from far-off lands, and no one in antiquity knew the location of the famous Isles of the Cassiterides. Carthage even went so far as to drown foreign merchants found in Sardinia or on the shore of Gibraltar, and a Carthaginian merchantman once ran aground to prevent a foreign ship from following it. In the countries where they traded, the Phoenicians established factories or branch houses and fortified posts on natural harbors where they landed their merchandise. The natives brought their own commodities to exchange, much like modern-day European merchants trading with Africans. Phoenician markets could be found in Cyprus, Egypt, and all the then barbarous countries of the Mediterranean, including Crete, Greece, Sicily, Africa, Malta, Sardinia, and on the coasts of Spain at Malaga and Cadiz, and possibly in Gaul at Monaco. Around these Phoenician buildings, the natives often set up their cabins, and the market would grow into a city. Even after the city became Greek, the inhabitants would continue to worship Phoenician gods, such as the dove goddess, Melkart, or the god with the bull face that devours human victims. The Phoenicians, in their pursuit of trade, were not concerned with anything beyond their own interests. However, their colonies ultimately contributed to the advancement of civilization. The Western barbarians were introduced to the refined cloths, jewels, and utensils of the Eastern peoples, and through imitation they too learned to create such objects. For a significant period of time, the Greeks only possessed vases, jewels, and idols that were brought to them by the Phoenicians, and these items served as their models. The Phoenicians also brought industry and commodities from both Egypt and Assyria. Simultaneously, they exported their alphabet. The Phoenicians did not invent writing. The Egyptians had been writing for centuries before them, even using letters that represented individual sounds, similar to our alphabet. However, the Egyptian alphabet was still encumbered with ancient signs that represented either a syllable or an entire word. The Phoenicians required a simpler system for their books of commerce, and so they discarded all the syllabic signs and ideographs, preserving only 22 letters, each of which represented a sound or articulation of their language. Other peoples imitated this alphabet of 22 letters. Some, like the Jews, wrote from right to left, just as the Phoenicians themselves did, while others, like the Greeks, wrote from left to right. Although the form of the letters has slightly changed over time, the Phoenician alphabet serves as the foundation for all alphabets, including Hebrew, Lycian, Greek, Italian, Etruscan, and Iberian, and perhaps even the Norse runes. It is the Phoenicians who taught the world how to write. Chapter 8. The Origin of the Hebrews. The Bible is an aggregation of sacred books that were united by the Jews. These books also became sacred to the Christians. The Bible is not only the history of the Jewish nation, but it is also the source of all our knowledge of the sacred people. The Hebrews were a tribe of Semites who left the plains of the Euphrates during the First Chaldean Empire and migrated to the country of Jordan beyond Phoenicia. They were a race of nomadic shepherds who lived in tents and moved from place to place with their herds of cattle, sheep, and camels. The tribe of Hebrews was like a great family, with the chief having absolute authority over all. These tribal chiefs were called patriarchs, and the principal ones were Abraham and Jacob. Both were chosen by God to be the scions of a sacred people. Abraham made a covenant with God that he and his descendants would obey him, and God promised him a posterity more numerous than the stars of heaven. Jacob received from God the assurance that a great nation would issue from himself. Jacob took the name of Israel, meaning contender with God, after being moved by a vision. His tribe was called Beni Israel, or Israelites. According to the Bible, Jacob and his house settled on the eastern frontier of Egypt after being invited by Joseph, one of his sons who had become a minister of a pharaoh due to famine. The sons of Israel lived there for several centuries and multiplied until they became 600,000 men, not counting women and children. And so it came to pass that the Pharaoh of Egypt began to oppress the Israelites, forcing them to toil in the construction of his great cities, making mortar and bricks for his ambitious projects. But in the midst of this despair, a man named Moses heard the call of God. As he tended to his herds on the mountain, an angel appeared to him in a burning bush, declaring, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have seen the affliction of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries against their oppressors, and I have come to deliver them from the Egyptians and bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites. Come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh to bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." And so Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, through the desert, and to the foot of Mount Sinai, where they received the law of God. But their journey was not without its challenges. Many of the Israelites longed to turn back, yearning for the fish, cucumbers, melons, leeks, and onions they had left behind in Egypt. But Moses held them to obedience, and they eventually reached the land promised to them by God. This land, known as Canaan or Palestine, was a harsh and arid country, scorching in the summer sun, but also a land of mountains. The Bible describes it as a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of oil, olive, and honey, wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness, thou shalt not lack anything in it. The Israelites, numbering 601,700 men capable of bearing arms, divided among 12 tribes, set out to conquer this land, which was already occupied by several small peoples known as the Canaanites. Through battle and conquest, the Israelites eventually exterminated the Canaanites and claimed their territory as their own. The religion of Israel. In the ancient world, many peoples worshipped multiple gods. However, the Israelites believed in only one God, who is immaterial and created and governs the world. According to the book of Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God also created plants, animals, and humans, whom he made in his own image. Therefore, all people are the handiwork of God. God chose the children of Israel to be his people. He made a covenant with Abraham, saying, "I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after me, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed." God also appeared to Jacob, telling him, "I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will make of thee there a great nation." When Moses asked God for his name, he replied, "Thou shalt say to the children of Israel, The Lord, the God of thy fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob hath sent me unto you. This is my name forever." Therefore there is a covenant between the Israelites and God. Jehovah, or the Eternal, loves and protects the Israelites, who are a holy nation, and his most precious jewel among all the nations. In return, the Israelites swear to worship him, serve him, and obey him in everything as a lawgiver, judge, and sovereign. Jehovah, the lawgiver of the Israelites, dictated his precepts to Moses on Mount Sinai amidst lightning and thundering. These precepts were inscribed on 2 tables, the tables of the law, in the following terms: "Hear, O Israel, I am Jehovah thy God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, from the land of bondage." Then follow the 10 Commandments, which can be found in the 20th chapter of the book of Exodus. Besides the 10 Commandments, the Israelites are required to obey many other divine ordinances. These are all delivered to them in the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, and constitute the law of Israel. The law regulates the ceremonies of religion, establishes the feasts including the Sabbath every 7 days, the Passover in memory of the escape from Egypt, the week of harvest, the Feast of Tabernacles during the vintage. It organizes marriage, the family, property, government, fixes the penalty of crimes, indicates even foods and remedies. It is a code at once religious, political, civil, and penal. God, the ruler of the Israelites, has the right to regulate all the details of their lives. The Israelites did not receive with docility the government of God. Moses on his deathbed could say to the Levites, in delivering to them the book of the law, Take this book, that it may be a witness against you, Israel, for I know thy rebellion and thy stiff neck. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 27. During my life you have been rebellious against the Lord, and how much more after my death? During these centuries, some of the Israelites, often the majority of the nation, had been idolaters. They became similar to the other Semites of Syria. Only the Israelites who remained faithful to God formed the Jewish people. It is the religion of Jehovah which has transformed an obscure tribe into the holy nation, a small nation, but one of the most significant in the history of the world. Once established in Palestine, the Hebrews remained divided for several centuries. In those days, says the Bible, there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Often the Israelites forgot Jehovah and served the gods of neighboring tribes. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against the Israelites, and he delivered them into the hands of their enemies. When they had repented and had humbled themselves, the Lord raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them. But it came to pass that at the death of the judge they corrupted themselves anew, bowing themselves to other gods. These judges, Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson, were warriors who came in the name of Jehovah to free the people. Then they fell at once into idolatry again, and their servitude was repeated. The monarchs. Finally the Israelites grew tired and requested a king from Samuel, the chief priest. Samuel reluctantly appointed Saul as their leader. This king was meant to be a faithful servant of God's will, but he dared to disobey him. The chief priest told him, "You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel." David, a war chief, was appointed in his place. He defeated all of Israel's enemies, captured Mount Zion from them, and made it his capital. This became Jerusalem. Compared to Babylon or Thebes, Jerusalem was a modest capital. The Hebrews were not builders, and their religion prevented them from constructing temples. The homes of individuals were shaped like cubes of rock, which can still be seen today on the sides of Lebanon amidst vines and fig trees. However, Jerusalem was the holy city of the Hebrews. The king had his palace there, including Solomon's palace, which amazed the Hebrews with its ivory throne. Jehovah had his temple there, which was the first Hebrew temple. The symbol of the covenant between God and Israel was a large cedarwood chest with gold rings, which contained the tables of the law. This was carried before the people on important feast days, and it was known as the Ark of the Covenant. To protect this ark and other necessary objects of worship, Moses is said to have built the tabernacle. This was a wooden pavilion covered with skins and hangings, and it was a portable temple that the Hebrews carried with them until they could build a permanent temple in the Promised Land. The temple, a grand structure erected by Solomon, was comprised of 3 distinct areas. The Holy of Holies, located at the rear, housed the Ark of the Covenant and was accessible only to the high priest once a year. In the middle was the holy place, home to the altar of incense, the candlestick with 7 arms, and the table of shewbread. The priests entered this area to present offerings and burn incense. The front area was the court, open to the people, where the great altar was used for sacrifices. The Temple of Jerusalem served as the nation's center, attracting people from all over Palestine to witness its ceremonies. The high priest, who oversaw the worship, often held more power than the king. Following the reign of Solomon, the kingdom of Israel was formed by 10 tribes who worshipped the golden calves and Phoenician gods. Only 2 tribes remained loyal to Jehovah and the king in Jerusalem, forming the kingdom of Judah. The 2 kingdoms engaged in war with each other, ultimately leading to their downfall at the hands of eastern conquerors. Israel was destroyed by Sargon, king of Assyria, in 722, and Judah fell to Nabuchodonosor, or Nebuchadrezzar, king of Chaldea, in 586. Faithful Israelites viewed these disasters as a punishment from God for their disobedience. They believed that God would deliver them from their conquerors, as he had done before. The children of Israel had sinned against Jehovah, their God, by building high places in every city, imitating the nations around them, making idols of brass, bowing before the stars, and worshipping Baal. As a result, Jehovah rejected all of Israel and allowed them to be afflicted and plundered. The seers, also known as the prophets, emerged onto the scene: Elijah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. They hailed from the desert, where they fasted, prayed, and meditated. In the name of Jehovah, they came not as warriors of judgment, but as preachers. They called upon the Israelites to repent, cast aside their idols, and return to Jehovah. They prophesied the woes that would befall them if they did not reconcile with him. They preached and prophesied simultaneously. These men, ablaze with divine spirit, found the official religion in Jerusalem to be lackluster and unfeeling. Why should they, like the idolaters, slaughter cattle and burn incense in God's honor? Hear the word of Jehovah, says Isaiah. To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices? I am full of the burnt offerings of rams and of the fat of fed beasts, and I delight not in the blood of bullocks, or of lambs, or of goats. Bring no more vain oblations. Your incense is an abomination to me. When ye spread forth your hands, I will hide mine eyes from you. For your hands are full of blood. Wash you, make you clean. Cease to do evil, learn to do well. Seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Instead of sacrifices, the prophets would focus on justice and good works. Israel deserved its afflictions, but there would be a limit to the chastisement. O my people, says Isaiah in the name of Jehovah, be not afraid of the Assyrian. He shall smite thee with a rod after the manner of Egypt. For yet a very little while, and the indignation shall cease, and the burden shall be taken away from off thy shoulder. The prophets taught the people to anticipate the coming of the Messiah, who would deliver them. They paved the way for the Messiah. The Jewish people longed for their homeland, even as they were exiled to the plains of the Euphrates. They sang of their beloved Zion, mourning their displacement in a foreign land. But after 70 years of captivity, Cyrus allowed them to return to Palestine. They rebuilt Jerusalem, restored the temple, and renewed their covenant with Jehovah. For 7 centuries the Jews maintained their kingdom, paying tribute to various masters but always faithful to Jehovah. They lived by the law of Moses, celebrating feasts and sacrifices in Jerusalem. The high priest and council of elders preserved the law, while scribes copied and doctors expounded it. The Pharisees were known for their zeal in fulfilling its requirements. As the Jews spread beyond Judah for trade, they established synagogues to read and comment on the Word of God. Though they could not raise additional temples, they were determined to preserve their religion. These synagogues became places of gathering and learning, scattered throughout the great cities of the world. The destruction of the temple was a pivotal moment in history, for it was at this moment that the Christ appeared. The Jews, fearing his message, crucified him and persecuted his disciples not only in Judea, but in every city where they found them in any number. In the year 70 A.D., Jerusalem, in revolt against the Romans, was taken by assault, and all the inhabitants were massacred or sold into slavery. The Romans burnt the temple and carried away the sacred utensils. From that time there was no longer a center of the Jewish religion, but the Jewish nation survived the ruin of its capital. The Jews, scattered throughout the world, learned to dispense with the temple. They preserved their sacred books in the Hebrew tongue. Hebrew is the primitive language of Israel. The Jews, since the return from Babylon, no longer spoke it, but adopted the languages of the neighboring peoples, the Syriac, the Chaldean, and especially the Greek. The rabbis, however, instructed in the religion, still learned Hebrew, explained it, and commented on the scripture. Thus the Jewish religion was preserved, and thanks to it, the Jewish people. It made converts even among the Gentiles. There were in the empire proselytes, that is, people who practiced the religion of Jehovah without being of the Jewish race. The Christian Church, powerful since the 4th century, began to persecute the Jews. In these times, the Jews were tolerated on account of their wealth and because they transacted most banking operations, but they were kept apart and not permitted to hold any office. In the majority of cities, they were compelled to wear a special costume, to live in a special quarter, gloomy, filthy, unhealthy, and sometimes at Easter time to send one of their numbers to suffer insult. The people suspected them of poisoning fountains, killing children, or profaning the consecrated host. Often the people rose against them, massacred them, and pillaged their houses. Judges, under the least pretext, had them imprisoned, tortured, and burned. Sometimes the church tried to convert them by force. Sometimes the government exiled them en masse from the country and confiscated their goods. The Jews, at last, disappeared from France, Spain, England, and Italy. In Portugal, Germany, Poland, and the Mohammedan lands, they maintained themselves. From these countries, after the cessation of persecution, they returned to the rest of Europe. Chapter 9. Greece and the Greeks. Greece is a small country, barely larger than Switzerland, but do not let its size fool you. It is a land of great diversity, with towering mountains and deep gulfs that have influenced the character of its inhabitants for centuries. The Pindus mountain range runs through the center of Greece, covering the land with its rocky terrain. As it nears the Isthmus of Corinth, it becomes lower, but the Peloponnesus on the other side of the isthmus rises to an elevation of about 2,000 feet above sea level. Its lofty chains, abrupt and snowy, fall perpendicularly into the sea like a citadel crowned with a fortress. Even the islands scattered along the coast are nothing more than submerged mountains whose peaks rise above the surface of the sea. Tillable ground is scarce in this diverse land, with almost everywhere bare rock. The streams, like brooks, leave only a narrow strip of fertile soil between their half-dried channels and the sterile mountain rock. Some forests, cypresses, laurels, and palms can be found scattered here and there, along with vines on the rocky hillsides. But there are no rich harvests or green pastures to be found. This rugged landscape produces wiry mountaineers, active and sober. Greece is a land of shores, with a coastline as long as Spain's, despite its size being smaller than Portugal. The sea penetrates it with numerous gulfs, coves, and indentations, surrounded by projecting rocks or approaching islands that form natural ports. The sea is like a lake, with a calm and lustrous surface, often described as the color of violets, as Homer once said. This sea is perfect for small ships, with the north wind rising every morning to guide the barks of Athens to Asia, and the south wind bringing them back to port in the evening. The islands between Greece and Asia Minor are like stepping stones, with land always in sight on a clear day. Such a sea beckons people to cross it, and cross it the Greeks have. They have been sailors, traders, travelers, pirates, and adventurers, much like the Phoenicians before them. They have spread over the ancient world, carrying with them the merchandise and inventions of Egypt, Chaldea, and Asia. The climate of Greece is mild, with Athens experiencing freezing temperatures only once every 20 years. During the summer months, the heat is tempered by the sea breeze. Even today, people can be found lounging in the streets from May to September. The air is crisp and clear, with the statue of Pallas visible from miles away. The distant mountains are not shrouded in haze, but stand out distinctly against the azure sky. Greece is a beautiful country that inspires one to live life to the fullest, for everything around is filled with joy. Walking in the gardens at night, listening to the chirping of the grasshoppers, playing the lute under the moonlight, drinking from the mountain spring, carrying wine to drink while singing, and spending days dancing. These are the pleasures of the Greeks, a race that is poor, economical, and forever young. In this country, people do not suffer from extreme heat or cold. They live outdoors, happy, and without spending much money. They do not require large quantities of food, warm clothing, or comfortable homes. A Greek can survive on a handful of olives and a sardine. Their clothing consists of sandals, a tunic, and a large mantle. Often they go barefoot and bareheaded. Their homes are meager and easily permeated by the air. A bed with some coverings, a chest, some beautiful vases, and a lamp are their only furnishings. The walls are bare and whitewashed. Their homes are only for sleeping. The Greeks who inhabited this charming little land were Caucasian people, related to the Hindus and Persians. They, like their ancestors, came from the mountains of Asia, or the steppes beyond the Caspian Sea. The Greeks had forgotten the long journey made by their ancestors, and believed that they, like the grasshoppers, were the children of the soil. However, their language and the names of their gods leave no doubt about their origin. Like all Caucasians, the primitive Greeks nourished themselves with milk and the flesh of their herds. They moved about under arms, always ready to fight, and grouped themselves into tribes governed by patriarchs. The legends. The Greeks, like all other ancient peoples, were ignorant of their origin. They did not know where their ancestors came from when they settled in Greece, or what they did there. To preserve the exact memory of things as they occur, there is a need for some means of fixing them. However, the Greeks did not know how to write until about the 8th century BC. They had no way of calculating the number of years. Later, they began counting the years according to the great feast celebrated every 4 years at Olympia. A period of 4 years was called an Olympiad, but the first Olympiad was placed in 776 BC, and the chronology of the Greeks does not rise beyond this date. And yet in Greece, they used to tell a great number of legends about this primitive period. These were especially the exploits of ancient kings and heroes who were adored as demigods. These stories were so mingled with fable that it is impossible to know how much truth they may contain. They said at Athens that the first king, Cecrops, was half man and half serpent. At Thebes they said that Cadmus, founder of the city, had come from Phoenicia to seek his sister Europa, who had been stolen by a bull. He had killed a dragon and had sown his teeth, from which was sprung a race of warriors. The noble families of Thebes descended from these warriors. At Argos it was said that the royal family was the issue of Pelops, to whom Zeus had given a shoulder of ivory to replace the one devoured by a goddess. Thus each country had its legends, and the Greeks continued to the end to relate them and to offer worship to their ancient heroes, namely Perseus, Bellerophon, Heracles, Theseus, Minos, Castor and Pollux, Meleager and Oedipus. The majority of the Greeks, even among the better educated, admitted, at least in part, the truth of these traditions. They accepted as historical facts the war between the two sons of Oedipus, king of Thebes, and the expedition of the Argonauts, sailing forth in quest of the Golden Fleece, which was guarded by two brazen-footed bulls vomiting flames. The tale of the Trojan War is among the most celebrated legends of all time. It tells of the powerful city of Troy, which ruled over the coast of Asia in the 12th century. Paris, a prince of Troy, travelled to Greece and took Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, as his own. Agamemnon, the king of Argos, formed a league with the kings of Greece, and together they sailed with a fleet of 200 galleys to besiege Troy. The siege lasted 10 years, as Zeus, the supreme god, had taken the side of the Trojans. All the Greek chiefs were involved in this epic adventure. Achilles, the bravest and most beautiful of them all, killed Hector, the main defender of Troy, and dragged his body around the city. Achilles wore divine armor given to him by his mother, a goddess of the sea, but he was ultimately killed by an arrow to his heel. The Greeks, unable to take the city by force, devised a trick. They pretended to leave and left behind a massive wooden horse, inside of which were the chiefs of the army. The Trojans brought the horse into the city, and during the night the chiefs emerged and opened the gates to the Greeks. The city of Troy was burned, the men slaughtered, and the women taken as slaves. However, the chiefs of the Greeks faced a tempestuous return journey. Some perished at sea, while others were cast onto foreign shores. Odysseus, the most cunning of the chiefs, was buffeted from one land to another for 10 years, losing all his ships and becoming the sole survivor of the disasters. Throughout antiquity, the Trojan War was believed to be true. The year 1184 BC was considered the end of the siege, and the location of the city was known. In 1874, Schliemann set out to excavate the site, which was buried under layers of debris from many cities. At a depth of around 50 feet, he discovered the remains of a great city reduced to ashes, and inside the ruins of the main building he found a casket filled with gold gems, which he called the Treasury of Priam. There were no inscriptions, and the city, whose entire wall was uncovered, was quite small. Many small crude idols were also found depicting an owl-headed goddess representing the Greek goddess Pallas. However, no evidence has been found to prove that this city was indeed Troy. The Homeric poems are the stuff of legend, known throughout the world for their epic tales of the Trojan War. The Iliad tells of the Greeks' battles and the heroic deeds of Achilles before the walls of Troy, while the Odyssey recounts the incredible adventures of Odysseus, also known as Ulysses after the city's fall. For centuries, these two poems were passed down through oral tradition, recited by wandering singers known as rhapsodists at feasts and gatherings. It wasn't until the 6th century that Pisistratus, a prince of Athens, had them collected and edited. From that time on, they became the most revered works of Greek literature. The Greeks believed that Homer, a blind old man from Ionia, was the author of these poems. Although 7 towns claimed to be his birthplace, this tradition was widely accepted. However, in the 18th century, a German scholar named Wolff noticed inconsistencies in the poems and argued that they were not the work of a single poet, but rather a collection of fragments from different sources. This theory has been hotly debated ever since, with passionate arguments for and against the existence of Homer. Today, we may never know the truth, but one thing is certain. These poems are ancient, likely dating back to the 9th century. The Iliad was likely composed in Asia Minor, and may be a combination of 2 separate poems, one about the Trojan battles and the other about Achilles' exploits. The Odyssey, on the other hand, appears to be the work of a single author, though it cannot be definitively linked to the same author as the Iliad. The Greeks in the time of Homer. We cannot journey far back into the annals of Greek history but the Homeric poems stand as their oldest historical account. When these works were written, around the 9th century BC, there was no universal name for all the inhabitants of Greece. Homer referred to them by their primary tribes. From his descriptions it appears that they had made some progress since their departure from Asia. They knew how to cultivate the land, construct fortified cities, and organize themselves into small communities. They were obedient to their kings, had a council of elders, and an assembly of the people. They were proud of their institutions and looked down upon their less advanced neighbors, whom they called barbarians. Odysseus, in an effort to demonstrate the Cyclops' rudeness, said, "They have no rules of justice nor places where they deliberate. Each one governs himself, his wife and children, and has no association with others." However, these Greeks were themselves half barbarians, as they did not know how to write, coin money, or work with iron. They were hesitant to trust themselves to the sea and believed that Sicily was inhabited by monsters, the Dorians. The name Dorians was given to the sons of mountaineers who had migrated from the north and had either expelled or subjugated those who lived in the plains and along the Peloponnesian coast. The latter, confined to a small area, sent colonies into Asia. The most famous of these mountain groups came from a small canton called Doris, and retained the name Dorians. These invaders told stories of how certain kings of Sparta, descendants of Heracles, had been ousted by their subjects and had gone to the mountains to seek the Dorians. The mountain people, motivated by their love for Heracles, had followed his descendants and restored them to their throne. In doing so, they dispossessed the inhabitants and took their place. They were a martial, robust, and healthy people, accustomed to cold weather, meagre food, and a sparse existence. Both men and women wore short tunics that did not extend to the knee. They spoke a crude and primitive dialect. The Dorians were a race of soldiers, always required to remain armed. They were the least cultured in Greece, as they were far from the sea and retained the customs of the barbaric age. However, they were the most Greek because, being isolated, they could not mix with outsiders or adopt their ways. The Ionians were a people of Attica, the islands, and the coast of Asia. Their name's origin is unknown, but they were a race of sailors and traders, the most cultured in Greece, and they gained knowledge from contact with the most civilized peoples of the Orient. They were the least Greek because they associated with Asiatics and had partially adopted their dress. The Ionians were peaceful and industrious, living luxuriously, speaking a smooth dialect, and wearing long flowing garments like the Orientals. The Hellenes were composed of two opposing races, the Dorians and the Ionians, who were the most remarkable and powerful in Greece. Sparta was Dorian, and Athens was Ionian. However, the majority of Greeks were neither Dorians nor Ionians, but rather called Aeolians, which is a vague name that covers very different peoples. All Greeks, from early times to the present day, take the name Hellenes. The origin of the term is unknown, but they said only that Dorus and Aeolus were sons of Helen, and Ion was his grandson. The Hellenes were still in small groups, like at the time of Homer. Greece's land, cut by mountains and sea, breaks naturally into many small cantons, each isolated from its neighbor by an arm of the sea or a wall of rocks, making it easy to defend the land but difficult to communicate with other parts. Each canton constituted a separate state called a city, and there were more than 100 of these, including colonies, which numbered over 1,000. To us, a Greek state seems like a miniature. The whole of Attica was only slightly larger than the state of Delaware, and Corinth, or Megara, was much smaller. Usually the state was only a city with a strip of shore and a harbor, or some villages scattered in the plain around a citadel. From one state, one can see the citadel, mountains, or harbor of the next state. Many of them counted their citizens only by thousands, and the largest included hardly 200,000 or 300,000. The Hellenes, though not united as one nation, shared a common language, religion, and way of life. They looked down upon other peoples whom they deemed barbarians. Despite their constant fighting, the Hellenes established colonies in neighboring lands. From the islands of the archipelago to the coasts of France and Spain, Greek cities sent out colonists to found new settlements. These colonies were established in various ways, by conquest or agreement with the natives, and were founded by mariners, merchants, exiles, or adventurers. Despite their diverse origins, the colonies shared common characteristics. They were established at once, according to fixed rules, and with a religious ceremony. The colonists arrived together under a leader, and the new city was founded in one day. The founder traced a sacred enclosure, constructed a sacred hearth, and lit the holy fire. The founding of colonies. The tales of old regarding the establishment of some of these colonies allow us to observe how they differed from modern colonies. The story of the founding of Marseille goes like this. Euxinus, a citizen of Phocea, arrived in Gaul aboard a merchant ship and was invited by a Gallic leader to attend his daughter's wedding. As per the custom of the Gauls, the young girl carried a cup during the feast that she would present to the man she chose as her husband. She stopped in front of the Greek and offered him the cup. This impromptu act seemed to be divinely inspired. The Gallic leader gave his daughter to Euxinus and allowed him and his companions to establish a city on the Gulf of Marseille. Later, the Phoceans, seeing their city under siege by the Persian army, loaded their families, belongings, statues, and temple treasures onto their ships and set sail, abandoning their city. As they departed, they threw a mass of red-hot iron into the sea and swore never to return to Phocea until the iron rose to the surface. Many broke this oath and returned, but the rest continued their voyage and, after many trials, arrived in Marseille. In Miletus, the Ionians who founded the city did not bring wives with them. They conquered a city inhabited by natives of Asia, killed all the men, and forcibly married the women and girls of their victims' families. It was said that the women, outraged by this treatment, swore never to eat with their captors or called them husband. This custom persisted among the women of Miletus for centuries. The colony at Cyrene in Africa was founded by the direct order of the oracle Apollo. The inhabitants of Thera, who received this command, were hesitant to go to an unfamiliar land. They only relented after 7 years of famine on their island, believing that Apollo had brought misfortune upon them as punishment. Nonetheless, the citizens sent out to establish the colony attempted to abandon the endeavor. Their fellow citizens attacked them and compelled them to return. After spending 2 years on an island with no success, they finally settled in Cyrene, which quickly became a thriving city. The significance of the colonies. Wherever the colonists settled, they established a new state that did not obey their mother town in any way. Consequently, the entire Mediterranean was surrounded by independent Greek cities. Many of these cities became wealthier and more powerful than their mother towns, possessing larger and more fertile territories, and, as a result, greater populations. Sybaris, for example, had 300,000 men capable of bearing arms, while Croton could field an infantry force of 120,000 men. Even Sparta and Athens were surpassed in terms of army size by cities such as Syracuse in Sicily and Miletus in Asia. South Italy was known as Great Greece, and in comparison the home country was only a small Greece. As a result, the Greeks were much more numerous in neighboring countries than in Greece proper, and many of the most celebrated names in Greek history came from these colonies. Homer, Alcaeus, Sappho, Thales, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, Democritus, Empedocles, Aristotle, Archimedes, Theocritus, and many others are among the people of the colonies who have achieved great renown.